Okay, so Aaron and I are familiar with Philadelphia property. Obviously, I'm more familiar because Aaron's mostly in the office. But we're just curious about the most common things that come up in Delaware homes and anything that you see that's unique to Delaware. And do you work in other states other than just Delaware?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Half of my business or more is in Pennsylvania. We
Okay.
do a chunk of business in Maryland. We're licensed in all three states. And we run a reliable home inspection service, but we're also affordable pest control. So we're involved in that
Okay.
end of the business as well.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the big things that we've learned about lately is septic, and apparently maybe it's only like 10% of homes that you see in Delaware. What would you say?
Well,
How often do you
just Delaware is a regulated state for septic and has a higher level of regulation than even the Pennsylvania regulations that you may be more familiar with. Delaware requires that every system be pumped at the time of inspection, which is completely different than Pennsylvania. In Pennsylvania, if the system fails, you don't pump it. In Delaware, you pump. Everything gets pumped. They also have a certification program in Delaware that might be a little different than you're used to dealing with, where the seller is responsible for not only inspecting, repairing the system, but if they do all that right when they start out, then they can have for 3 years from that date, they can transfer the septic system with no further inspections, and they pay for everything here in Delaware. Some of the agents, I'm not really doing that so much. I just think there's some lack of communication or whatever. But you just don't want to get in a situation where you're 3 days out of settlement trying to find a septic inspector right now, because let's tell you, they're not easy to get. We've been trying to hire a septic inspector to renew our septic evaluation side for 3 years, and I just simply can't find a single person willing to do that job.
Wow. Now, just for clarification, so our understanding is that every 2 years they're required, seller or owners are required to pump, and every 3 years they're required to inspect. And with the agreement of sale, they're required to show that they've done that within the last 36 months. And when you said you don't think agents are doing that, are you saying that some sellers are, I mean, they have to do it in the past. So are you saying some people are just doing it as part of their listing process?
Well, just remember, in Delaware, they changed the regulations about 5-6 years ago. And so it used to be there was an unregulated septic inspection system down here. There wasn't anything. And then they heavily regulated it. And I'm not aware that you have to do an inspection every 3 years. I know that you're supposed to pump every 3 years as minimum. So maybe you're reading something I haven't read. Remember, I'm a Pennsylvania certified septic inspector.
Yeah.
I have septic inspectors that work for me in Delaware. They would be more up on those exact rules. But I live in Delaware. We pump ours every year only because it's an old system. If you pump it more than a year, you're going to get noticed. So that's something you want to make sure that your sellers, if they're thinking about pumping it after a party or whatever, just realize you start pumping it more than every year, then the Delaware septic people will start thinking you've got a bad system, and they might require an inspection at that point as a reaction to that. The pumper told me if he sends 3 bad pump slips up to the state, expect a call. So we had one, and I said, stop. Well, I had a kid who left the faucet on here, and then we had the thing pumped, and so it was up to the top. So their certification program is really about selling the house. Once you get online to sell the house, you want to get everything lined up. And so I think some people are actually trying to push back a little bit so they get more time. So in other words, if you put the house on now and you inspect it right now and it sits on for 2.5, 3 years, you're going to have to inspect it again. I guess their concern is if they let it sit until they get an offer, then do the inspection, then they have more time after that to use their certificate, I would guess. But that's trying to understand why people do stuff that I think is a bit different. Me personally, I would want to know that my system's good. I would want to get it repaired. I would want to have the buyer come in, see a certificate laying on the table saying everything's fine. That would be, I think, the right way to go forward. And remember this about Delaware. Delaware, the septic inspector is directly laced to the government. All right, so in Pennsylvania, unless you get a septic enforcement officer or some Chester County Health Board, somebody shows up, the government's unaware of conditions. In Delaware, the reports go directly to the state within 3 days. We had an individual arrested based on a septic inspection.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that's crazy. Number one. Number two, the contracts do indicate, there's something about it. Like, I just know that there's a lot of liability on the seller and the buyer if they don't do it. Basically, if DNREC, the Division of Natural Resources, they catch up with you, you could be in deep doo-doo.
You're going to have to do it before you go to settlement. You can't transfer the property without it. But what I'm saying is that period in there, sometimes people are doing it in the front, sometimes they're doing it in the back. Just depends on, what the strategy is involved. Now, there's also an issue with cesspools in Delaware. You cannot transfer a property in the state of Delaware that has a cesspool or a seepage pit.
Wait,
The cesspool,
can we
yeah.
pause on that real quick? So when you say you can't transfer property, so if let's say somebody had inspected 40 months ago, because it is 36 months according to the contract. So let's say they had done the inspection 40 months ago. Are you saying somebody's going to flag the transaction or not let them go to settlement, or?
I'm talking about it, not about the period of inspection. I'm talking about the type of device. So in other words, if you have a seepage pit or a cesspool, which is a category of septic equipment, you cannot sell that property in Delaware until it's removed or replaced. Period.
What is a cesspool and a seepage pit?
Okay, so a cesspool is a one pipe tank. So what happens is all the stuff from the house goes into a tank. The tank's got holes in the side of it. It leaches out through those holes. The problem is it's all below the groundwater and it's contaminating the groundwater. That's why they're making it illegal. In Pennsylvania, you cannot repair them, but you can use them and you can transfer them. In Delaware, you can't do either.
So are you saying they're no longer grandfathered in? As soon as you go to sell it, you have to replace it with a regular septic system that doesn't leach into the ground like that?
Yeah, well, it doesn't leach down so deep. That's the problem, is that the groundwater table is often involved in the depth of those systems. So just know in Delaware now, I talked to a guy who is, let's just say he's an extremely wealthy guy who buys a lot of stuff. And he said that if you go to Denarec and you tell them that, look, yeah, we're going to buy the property from grandma, here's the permitting, here's all the engineering, here's everything together. Can we submit that and then have a year to get it installed? And he told me that they've been accepting some of those. So there is maybe some lateral movement there, but just know, like for instance, there's a neighborhood called Coverbridge Farms over in Newark. Beautiful old homes, 50s houses, nice brick stuff. Every one of them's got a cesspool. So if you buy a house in that neighborhood, then you immediately know that something's going to have to happen with that before settlement, or at least based on the information I got from this builder.
Yeah.
He said that you have to make an arrangement up front. He said then you can do it, but it all has to be in the pipe before you get started. So just know that is, like, if you want to know the big difference between PA and Delaware, that'll hit you right in the face there, particularly if you're selling in a neighborhood like that or one similar.
Yeah, that is really interesting because there is a clause in the septic inspection part of the agreement that talks about if the buyer and seller are allowed to go to closing without the inspection, that the buyer is taking responsibility, by X date after the contract, like to remediate or do anything like that. So I'm wondering if that's
probably the area that he was telling me that he's found some room to move. But we just make sure people understand, look, you know what, you go out and sell grandmom's farm and she says that the septic tank has one pipe going into it, then you need to know you got to get moving. You know that you're not into a standard situation.
So cesspool and seepage pit are the two.
Yeah, so basically, sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you, but a cesspool is usually a cylinder or can be a square box. And then we have the tank that you use in a regular septic system. A lot of times they'll install one of those in front of that cesspool, and then it becomes a seepage pit.
Okay.
So
it's a lot of words.
And there's a lot of technical jargon in this conversation.
Yeah.
Look, I'm trying not to do it, but that's what this stuff is called.
That's okay. That's okay. I think just knowing the words, because what we're trying to do is help agents identify if they're talking to somebody that says they have a septic tank, and they could ask, do you have a seepage pit or a cesspool? And they say yes, then they know, hey, you might need to replace this as part of the sales agreement.
Yeah, you may have to move into a different category. But anyway, yeah, so you may have to do something a little different in that circumstance. That's all.
Now, is anything what you're saying having anything to do with the number of compartments in the septic tank?
Well, the way it works in Delaware is most Delaware tanks are double tanks. That's in a standard tank. A cesspool is a completely different animal. It's built different. I have a diagram over here when I'm teaching my classes. I pop the diagram up and it's pretty easy to understand then. But it's a completely different animal. It's not like a regular, standard drainage field and a distribution box and a tank, which is kind of what you see most places. And then from there, you got to remember the steps up. So you can step up from there and start going into specialty systems where you can't even use a Class H inspector. You have to use somebody who's got, I think, an E or an F license to do those. Okay. Generally, those type of systems are going to have maintenance procedures being performed on them on a regular basis, and there should be a contract for that.
Yeah, you may not know the answer to this question, but there was something in the agreement that says if somebody's under a service agreement with a septic tank, provider or whatever, septic contractor, that just by virtue of that agreement, they've satisfied what they need to do for the buyer. And it seemed to me it was missing a step in terms of, it wasn't saying that the buyer is going to call or the seller is going to call the provider and provide the documentation. It just seemed to say that by virtue of having that agreement in place, they've satisfied their inspection requirements.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to reread all that because I don't remember that being in there. It's been a while since I read the whole contract through, and things change. But
Yeah.
what I would say there is, look, there are advanced systems. All right, so like I've been trained on systems that actually discharge directly into a stream, and you're supposed to be able to step up in there behind that thing and drink it, but you first. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it actually is so complicated. It's actually its own little water treatment system in your backyard. And that would absolutely be on a contract because there's pumps, there's valves, there are some parts of these systems that you can't even open up unless you're a representative of Ecolab or somebody, because they are that complicated. So what we deal with is there's the basic stuff and then it gets crazy. You know what I mean? So what I think is, for most people, the Class H license in Delaware is going to work just fine. If you find out there's septic, and that just simply means there's no air in the system. Then there's aerobic, and that means there's air in the system. And when you do an aerobic system, that means there's pumps and there's things that are moving air in and out. And then you're going to have a guy that's on contract. I mean, we've got a system over here in Pennsylvania that's a spray irrigation system, which means they spray all the wastewater out onto the field. So you remember your kid, you want to run through the sprinklers, you don't want to run through those.
Oh my gosh. Well, let me real quick before we move on to the next topic, because I know these are not as frequent. I just wanted to share the agreement of sale. Let me just sidebar. So here it indicates the 36-month rule about the Class H inspection after pumping. And then in the event the regulations allow this transaction to qualify for an inspection to be delayed until after settlement and no inspection is completed prior to settlement, the buyer will do it within 90 days, and then they accept any responsibility for upgrades or replacements at that time. So that was kind of what I thought might be related.
And that's kind of what that guy's using, I would imagine. But he's saying 90 days. That guy said it had to all be packaged up before he went to settlement. So apparently, I guess you do it this way as well.
Yeah. Well, this is the inspection could be done within 90 days after closing. And then
but remember, that inspection is going to get reported directly to the state, and any repairs that need to be done are going to they're not going to be just if you want to.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. What was the thing we were talking right before that made me want to look at the agreement of sale? Do you remember?
Well, you were saying that if they were in contract and they had a contract with a maintenance provider, that they didn't have to do anything further.
Yeah, so look, it says, if the seller of an individual on-site wastewater septic tank system provides proof of a licensed operator or has a service contract with a certified service provider, then the seller shall provide evidence of same to buyer no later than the date specified herein, and those requirements shall have been met. These requirements shall have been met. So it seemed to be like, my thought was, if you have this service contract, then the service provider is doing certain things to help you comply with the state law.
I would agree with that, because remember that the service provider you're dealing with has to provide service within the licensure that he has, right?
Yeah.
So in other words, he can't let you go 5 years without a pump if you have a contract that he's supposed to maintain your system. And I think a lot of that too, in that statement there, may also regard to commercial properties. Because if you think about a commercial property on a large septic system.
Purely residential. Yeah, this is purely residential. We don't know anything about that.
Okay, all right. I was just thinking that might be a reason why, but because we do those too.
So what is something that you notice in Delaware houses that's like the biggest cause for concern, whether it's in the home, termite, radon?
Well, I'm an electrician, so you can bet you I find lots of electrical issues. I'm finding a lot of knob and tube wiring lately. It seems to be, I'm finding a lot of knob and tube wiring when I work in Philadelphia, but Wilmington as well. And knob and tube wiring in the air conditioning season has certainly created some fires over the years. So, so knob and tube wiring, got to pay attention to. Aluminum wiring, North Wilmington, Newark area, really all this stuff is based on when things were built. So the whole city was built in the 30s. And knob and tube wiring was 20 through 50. So you're going to see a lot of it there. Aluminum wire, you're going to see in the areas were built between 65 and 72. So that gives you North Wilmington. It gives you most of the Newark area around the college and stuff. You'll see a lot of it there. So those are kind of common. You'll find those everywhere. Look, I could go out in Ohio tomorrow and find 90% of the stuff that we have here there. So it's, you know, housing's pretty similar.
Yeah, what would you say? I was going to look up and see if I could show an image of what aluminum wiring looks like so people can identify it. But is there a specific look to it?
No, you got to pull the panel cover, or you got to pull an outlet plate, which is really kind of beyond what you'd expect the buyer to do.
Oh, sure.
You see the word, what is it? Kaiser on the cabling, and it will say aluminum. So if you see black wires, black jacketed wires with the word Kaiser on them in silver print, and you see the word aluminum, that's kind of telling you. So look for that. I mean, look at the jackets on the wires that are coming out of the electrical panel if you're suspicious. And remember, the target years are going to be between 65 and 72, although the government banned it from manufacturing in 72, so you'll see it out to 76 sometimes. So, but if you're in that window, there you go.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, so
this one down here in the middle is the best one. The one that shows all that terminal strip where you see them all stuck in there. Right, next one over. One over. That's a good one, because that's where I'm looking. When I'm doing my inspection, I'm looking at that.
Where did it go?
It's up here in the top corner. It's over here.
Oh, it moved to the top right. Okay, so this one right over here.
When I'm taking a panel apart, that's what I'm looking for. Now, remember, aluminum wire can live in the house from outlet to outlet. I'm never going to know it. But if it comes to the panel, when I pull the panel cover, that's when I'm going to see it.
Right. So are there any telltale signs that there could be knob and tube when you're in the house without pulling
outlets in the baseboard? Good thing.
Outlets in the baseboard, okay.
Yeah, like you see two prongers in the baseboard. And not a bad idea for the consumer to have a little electrical tester walking around, you know, if you're concerned and you see those three prong out, there's good news. Yeah, you're quick on the pictures, I'll give you that. Knob and tube wiring right there that you're showing is all perfectly legal. Blow some insulation over that and it's perfectly illegal.
Okay.
And that's the problem.
What is the, obviously the knob is like the thing that goes around, and the tube is the thing that goes
through the floor joist. Yeah. See, my granddad would tell you in 1920, this was the best system he ever installed for the fact that it didn't touch anything but porcelain. You know what I mean? So he felt like it was a pretty safe system. Here's the problem with it. The old stuff shares a neutral, and I'm not going to get too jargony on you, but in other words, you have two wires that come to your outlet, right, and the ground. Well, the neutral is the white wire. And in old knob and tube systems, they would fuse that at the panel. We don't now. And they could bring 3 circuits back on that one wire. So if I got window air conditioners on 3 circuits, up to 60 amps is coming back on a single wire. And that'll get you a bright red one through your attic. So that's the problem. It'll get you a bright red wire running through your attic.
And what do you mean by bright red wire? A hot wire?
Overheated.
So like you touch it.
It'll burn you. It'll set your house on fire. Yeah, it'll set your house on fire. Okay? You know, we try not to be too like that, you know what I mean? But yeah, and so the problem is that this stuff was designed to operate in free air, and free air just simply means that there's no insulation around it. So when you put insulation around it, first of all, you just put a flammable product right up against something that might heat. And secondly, you're not allowing it to cool like it's supposed to, so it can actually get in more trouble. So what happens is modern things like we want to warm our houses and keep them nice have now met old wiring that was never designed to be used with insulation. And so knob and tube generally will pass inspection with a note. We'll tell you about it. But if we see it touching insulation in any form, it becomes an instant defect.
Yeah. So yeah, something that I've noticed is that, you know, I'll see the remnants of the knob and tube in the basement, but there's no wires on it anymore. I'll see a ton of new wires coming out from the panel, but I'll always tell the buyers, you know, they may rewire the first floor, but like you said, going from the first to the second, it could still be the old wiring. And then one of the tests, and I think you recommended bringing one of those outlet testers, is because if you see a 3-prong that's not grounded, it would be better to put it back to 2-prong, but also when your inspector goes there, they could potentially pull the little box out and look and see if there's like, no, don't look, don't do that.
We can't pull covers. We can pull the panel cover, but we're not pulling outlet covers. And there's a really simple reason. Which ones?
Okay, you know what? You know who did it? My contractor did it. So when I suspected that there was knob and tube, he came in and he actually pulled it back.
Yeah, because we're going to pull the main panel cover, so we get to look at the wiring there. But you know, it's like we don't dismantle electrical outlets. You know what I mean? Because the problem is, which one do you want me to take apart? There's 80 of them here, you know, and if I say I took this one apart and inspected it, then how do I know that that one over there wasn't really the problem? What I'm going to do is use a tester that's going to tell me the condition of the wiring coming out. If I see it's ungrounded, I see it's reverse polarity or any of those things, we're just going to simply write that up and suggest an electrician who's then capable of pulling all the plates and following the circuits out. I'm an electrician by trade, so obviously, as you can imagine, sometimes, yes, I want to yank more stuff than I'm allowed, but I'm just not. Remember, I'm home inspector guy. Oh, wait a minute, wrong chest. Home inspector guy, everything's backwards. Home inspector guy, not electrician guy, and I got to be really careful to separate the two.
Right. So to be clear, it was my contractor who did that, not the inspector.
Well, sorry to be bragging my picture, but, you know.
So as far as what an agent can do is they could look if they see baseboard outlets, that's probably knob and tube. Obviously, if they see wires that still seem to be connected and they see the knob and tube porcelain in the basement, that could be a clue. The age of the home. And then certainly if the bathroom has not been updated upstairs, you know, if it's an older home, potentially it's all still knob and tube. And I'll just say the estimate that I just told you about that just went up by 40% is my electrician, because he's rewiring a whole bunch of rooms for me that have knob and tube. But upstairs, the bathroom was totally done a couple years ago and it's all good. The kitchen was done, it's all good. But it's all the rooms, you know, the bedrooms that they didn't touch and the overhead lights and the baseboard electric.
Well, I'll tell you what, another way that you can kind of know, and sorry, we're kind of bumping into each other a little bit, but one way is that you can know is take a look at the fixtures on the high floor. We all know what them old cast iron knob and tube fixtures look like. You start seeing those hanging from the ceiling, it's a good chance. Now, just because there's outlets in the baseboard doesn't guarantee that it's knob and tube, but it puts you in a direction, because see, the old guys, they had to drill through the floor there to get the wire, so they would cut the hole in the baseboard because their bit was about that long and they had to get through the floor. That's why they put them down there and set up in the wall like you do today, because today you got a 4-foot bit you can use. So just the practicality of putting the outlets in puts them in the baseboard at the time period at which they didn't have the tools to move them up into the wall, so that makes it suspicious for knob and tube, but not a guarantee. Remember, there's BX out there, there's old cloth, 2-prong wire stuff. I mean, so there's a lot of different varieties of wiring materials that can be a problem. Really, it's just a matter of checking all the outlets, making sure we're grounded, just kind of do our job, move through.
Yeah. Okay. What other things do you think are bigger concerns specific to Delaware?
Well, it's hard to say specific to Delaware. I keep doing that to you, I know, but Delaware, the septic stuff is different. We covered that. The relationship between the agents and the buyers is all the same down here, not a whole lot different. The contracts obviously are completely different between the two states, and the way that people have to negotiate are really different in the two states. I know that, but that's your end, not mine. Just remember, in Delaware, if they fix it all, you own it. You know, there's no walk away. So that's why it's really important to do a thorough inspection, because in Delaware, a common reply that we see is we will repair it all, because in Delaware, that just locked the deal. And then they fight you over what they actually did or didn't do. So you want to make sure that go ahead.
You know, you just made me realize, so in Delaware, different from Pennsylvania, I understand that the first deposit might be larger than the second deposit, or they do one deposit at the beginning, although the total deposit sounds to be typically less than Pennsylvania. But what this is making me think is that the reason why it's larger is because if it were the $1,000 to $2,500 as it is in PA, it would be easy for a buyer to walk away from that if they were overwhelmed and couldn't get out of that contract. Whereas putting a larger deposit down makes that buyer stick to that deal and give the seller that opportunity to repair everything.
Yeah, well, I personally, as an individual, like your contract a whole lot better than ours, but you know, I like the PA contract better.
Oh, no, me too. No, but I'm just saying the relationship between why the deposits are different, because if I knew that I had to accept the property if the seller did everything, you know, that feels like there's very little wiggle room to get out. You know, like you better be sure you want that house.
Yeah, in Delaware, let me tell you what, it's Delaware's a business state. It ain't fooling around. There's no, in other words, business wins in Delaware. That's just how it is. But what I would say just in general is that the real estate contract in Delaware is designed to get the thing to the table. That's what it's about. You know, so the buyer just needs to be aware.
So Aaron and I often talk about how in Pennsylvania, the inspection period is the most horrible period of the contract because it is all negotiable, you know, with the exception of usually the termite or the seller does treat for termites. Everything else is negotiable, and the buyer has the right to accept, terminate, or negotiate. And like you said, in Delaware, it's pretty much you present the report to the seller. They have the right to do everything. And then if they do, you bought it. And if they don't, then you can buy it anyway, or you can negotiate. So this is almost like, Aaron, like what we've always dreamed of in terms of like, let's just not go back and forth. Let's just convey houses that are up to date, you know, like not to say that people should get upgrades per se, like an unlined chimney, for example. I don't expect you to line it for me, but if it's crumbling and it's not exhausting, then now that's a repair issue. So in a way, I think this is actually preferable. What do you think, Erin?
Oh, my dream was that repairs would never even be a factor, and it would only just be financial credits that were negotiated. That was
Oh
that
yeah,
was what
I
would make
hate
it simpler for.
Yeah,
Well, let me
no,
tell you,
I
that's my
agree.
recommendation to all my relatives when they get wrapped up in a real estate deal. Look, the guy selling the place is not going to make repairs you're going to like. He's going to get pop with a bucket of tar out there. And I've seen lots and lots of that. That's one of the reasons we will not do re-inspections, period.
Tell me more
It's a
though, because
shocking
that's
statement, huh? No,
well,
because here's what happens. I go in the house and I write up a bunch of electrical repairs that require a permit and an inspection, or we could just have the home inspector go back and look at it. Really? How's that work?
well, so first of all, in the agreement of sale, it does say, and let me pull it up. Give me a second.
All repairs made by licensed contractors, right?
If necessary, if necessary. So
Hmm.
let me just pull
Everything
it up.
electrical, everything plumbing,
Yeah,
everything heating.
yeah. Okay. Okay. So the request for repairs must be made by the deadline specified, and the seller shall, in writing, agree to correct any major defects at seller's sole cost, and if necessary, by a licensed contractor professional. So, you know, does it, for example, like you said, Poppy or Grandpoppy, whatever's maybe throwing some tar over the roof to coat it, does he need to be licensed?
Yeah, to be a roofer, sure.
Okay.
Now, if he's the homeowner, no. But remember this,
Right.
we have the sleep with it rule in Delaware. Here's the way it works. I am an electrician, but I'm not licensed because I'm union, right? So I can go wire on my properties all I want until I'm not living there. All right, so that's kind of how the rule breaks. So in other words, I can do electric work here because I live here, I sleep with it, and my family
Right.
sleeps with it, so I'm going to do a good job. But if I go out to somebody else's house, then I must be licensed, insured, and we must go through the permitting procedure.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
if you read
Yeah,
that
because it
contract, it specifically states that all required permits must be secured, and that requires governmental inspections of the work, which I know nobody wants to do, but guess what? That's the law, and it's in your contract. So what I
yeah,
think
what's in
is,
the contract versus what happens.
yeah, well, that's
Like,
what I'm going to try to end that what happens part here. Because
yeah,
look, here's what happens. The poor buyer winds up in this bubble, right? Here's the bubble. The inspector tells them everything that's wrong with the house, and then the seller makes repair, and then the home inspector comes in and says, oh, it's all great, move in. Well, that's fine, but there should have been a governmental interaction with the contractor that's being missed here. You know what I mean? So in other words, I'm an electrician. I can't do electric work without a permit, even on my own house. You know, and a permit requires an inspection. So all the heater
does
work,
does all electrical work though need license or permits
pretty much,
though? If
pretty much, unless you can replace some plates, maybe change some fixtures out, probably. I have to look at the exact rules on that, but as soon as you run any wire, it requires a permit.
so, what if it's a 3-prong outlet that you're returning to a 2-prong?
I don't know that particular rule, you know what I mean? But I think that's a minimum repair. But I'm talking about changing the service or that kind of stuff.
Right, sure. So like, but what about like a railing, tightening a railing? Like, so I think there's a lot of items though that still
That's not
come up that,
electrical. That's not
no,
electrical
no,
or plumbing or,
well,
you know
there's
what I
more
mean?
than just electrical. There's more than just electrical, you know.
Well, that's what I
So
mean.
I'm just,
Electrical, plumbing, anything that requires a license to do. Like in other words, if a handyman can do it, like tighten up your railing, that's fine. And by the way, my buyer can check that and be confident that they know that that railing's tight, right? But when we get into doing gas work in a house, that always requires a permit if there's more than 2 feet of gas pipe that's being messed with. So that's why I'm against re-inspections of those things. I think that makes sense, or I would hope it does.
Yeah.
So I just, look, here's a circumstance that went on. You know what, let's move on from this. I think it's probably not much deeper.
No, I mean, I think it's an interesting, it's definitely interesting because it, you know, I guess in the way, like in my experience, even if I get, and I hate to say this, but even if I get a receipt from a licensed roofer, I would rather have somebody I trust look at that again to say, yeah, that looked good.
Yeah, but the problem is you just got your guy to buy the job. That's what we did. We just bought the job. As soon as I set foot on that roof, I bought the job. So in other words, anything goes wrong with that, they're going to come after me.
What's that?
I said, if anything goes wrong with that roof, they're not going after the roofer, they're coming after me. I've been sued for this. Yeah, I got called out to do a re-inspection on a roof early in my career. All right. And when I went and did the inspection to start with, I damn near fell through the roof because the plywood was so rotted. Right. So I go back out to do the re-inspection. I peel the edge of the roof up. It looks good. All the nails are there, new plywood. I get up there like a big idiot jumping around the roof like some big idiot, you know, and it's all good and solid. And I can't get under to count the nails, so I don't know how many nails are in it, but it's a roof, right? So I sign off. And then about 3 weeks later, there's a big thunderstorm. Guess where all the shingles from that roof wound up? In the backyard, because the idiot put 1 to 2 nails in each shingle, other than the ones at the top and bottom where I could check them. And they sued me. Now they lost because the agent, very smart agent, had put in her you guys call it a response to contract or the home inspection. I used to say the addendum response, but people tell me that's wrong. But my point is he put on there that all repairs be done by licensed contractors and receipts returned to the buyer prior to settlement. Well, they had their brother-in-law go do the roof. And the brother-in-law was mad that he had to do the roof. That's why he put inadequate nails in it, because he was trying to get even with the buyer. And this all started with a furniture deal, by the way. If this is going to be new realtors looking at this, don't do the furniture deal until the house is sold. We get out there to do this inspection, right? And the lady in the house is very infirm. She's one of those folks that has to have the support under the back of her head. I don't know which particular disease puts you in that position. And there had been a bad furniture deal between her and the buyer, and he's screaming in the windows at this lady before the home inspection even started.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Look,
So I try to avoid negotiating furniture at all because that's not my job, number one. Number two, I don't want furniture to get wrapped up in the big things like the repairs and, you know, all that stuff. So I agree, definitely postpone that.
Such animosity between that buyer and seller that the seller, instead of doing a reasonable repair, was looking to stick it to the buyer over the furniture deal. And that's what caused all this and made me so anti-reinspection.
Yeah. Yeah, and one thing that you mentioned that made me think that I wanted to mention was that, so this section A says that if necessary, licensed contractor professional does it, and that permits must be secured, and that written proof of completion shall be supplied to buyer at least 2 days prior to settlement. This doesn't say that all things that you want licensed and insured contractors or professionals to do it. It doesn't state that all of them have to. So in people's response to the inspection, I encourage people to make sure it's specific that you want licensed contractors, licensed and insured contractors or professionals for that item, and not just written proof of completion, but paid receipts, or that it's going to get paid on the final settlement statement, because I want to make sure that it gets paid.
Also, you know, there's a release, like when I used to do the 203Ks, there's a release of the mechanics lien document as well that we were required to get, which I think is pretty important too, because if the seller reneges on paying, they can turn around and sue the new owner.
Yeah, so I mean, I would look for as an agent is to have paid receipts prior to settlement or at closing that the seller is actually paying those people off.
Yeah.
You know, paying the receipts that we got, the written proof of completion. If it says 10,000 is owed for XYZ, I want to see the 10,000 on the final settlement statement.
Well, and the other thing that you just read here was that the receipts were supposed to come back to the buyer prior to settlement. I think that's super important because what if it turns out Joe's auto body was the one that put your heater in?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I've seen that too. You know, well, cousin Bob, he's pretty good at that, you know, so that's, all of those are big concerns for us. And like I said, because I've had some legal activity based on a reinspection, it opened my eyes up to the fact that, look, a bad contractor can do whatever they want and you don't know. And in the home inspection, we write all this stuff about have further evaluated by a licensed contractor because we're generalists and they're supposed to be specialists and way smarter than us. But then, of course, after the job's done, we can always know exactly what their thought process was, what's under the layer that's there that we can't see under, and therefore we can just go ahead and sign off, and the thing goes to settlement. You see how I got a real problem with that?
Right. So you're being sarcastic there, and I want to make it clear.
Very, very. But you understand my point.
Yes, no, I totally get your point. I totally get your point.
I was involved in a transaction in Maryland, and you ever been in one of them email chains you just wish you weren't in? It's supposed to be over and they leave you in it. So the thing was, they called up and they wanted me to come back and re-inspect all the repairs, right? And I said no, and she was very upset. And then she sent an email to the buyer immediately. I guess we're going to have to get receipts now.
You should get receipts.
But you understand my point? It just proved to me exactly what's going on. As soon as I set foot on that property, I might as well got paid for the job because I'm responsible for it. Anyway, like I said, I think we've belabored this, so up to you.
No, I think this is really important, and these are not the kinds of conversations people are having when you teach an inspection class per se. So I think it's really important. And right now I'm dealing with a post-settlement issue where the heater, it was like a heat pump in a condo. There was something wrong with it at the inspection. It wasn't always blowing hot. It wasn't always blowing cold. And there was a drip inside. And then at settlement, it seemed to have been fixed prior, but then when we got to settlement, it wasn't really fixed. So we specified in the escrow agreement, which are very hard to get approved, but we got it approved because it was a cash deal. And we specified that a licensed and insured, HVAC technician is going to come to the property, diagnose it, and yada, yada, yada. So in the meantime, the HVAC person the seller picked went to the property, said, hey, this unit is so old, we can't repair it, we can replace it though. And then over the weekend, the seller sent the handyman back, who was the one who said it was okay all along and tried to fix it all along, sent him back, who said, oh, it's working fine. And then the HVAC technician was supposed to come back to give the sales guy was supposed to come back to give a quote for replacement because the first guy could only do repair. And so in the meantime, the seller canceled that appointment because he said his handyman said it was okay. So it just goes to show, like, you have to do what the escrow agreement says or the agreement that you put in place. So this is just bringing up the point of, like, Delaware has attorneys involved, like has at least one attorney involved in the transaction. Have them review the language, because a lot of times agents don't think of if this then what. So like, let's say you have, $5,000 in escrow, but you don't specify what happens if what you say should happen, it doesn't happen. Well, the money just sits there, so a lot of times we write these the language that leads to nowhere, because people will not they will not follow through, and so we just need to make sure that we're protecting our clients by having that attorney, review that language.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, I'm very much in favor of attorneys involved in transactions, very much involved in that. And I know title companies are really convenient because they come to your office and stuff like that. And I've even had some attorneys that met me places that I had to do settlements. You know what I mean? They were flexible enough to meet me halfway to the beach at a truck stop or something, and we borrowed somebody's office and we did a quick settlement. She went north and I went south, so things like that can happen. What I would say just in general on repair stuff, it's really hard to predict the outcome of a repair when you've only got 5 minutes to see if it worked. You know what I mean? So in other words, they say, yeah, it's up and running. Yeah, it's up and running until the Freon I just pumped into it all leaks back out in the next 24 hours and it ain't going to run tomorrow. That's something that I would advise new agents to definitely be looking at on a seller's disclosure. What was the latest time that piece of equipment was repaired? If it was 3 days ago and it's an air conditioner, you can bet you they hot shotted it to get it through the inspection, which is
so after that condo inspection with that HVAC unit, I went back to make sure it was all repaired a week before closing, as I like to do. I like to kind of verify what I can before we have the inspector go back out, if the inspector is willing to re-inspect, because I don't want to waste time, because a lot of times sellers will say that they did everything that they were going to do, but they didn't. They really didn't read the list. And so I don't want to waste people's time or money. So I'll go out. And so I actually took a video and it's like, yeah, the heat's coming out of this thing. I can feel the vent, producing heat. But when I went back for the pre-settlement walkthrough, it wasn't. So maybe like what you said, it worked for a minute and then it didn't work again. So, oh goodness, you're also making me think of another thing that, oh yes, okay. So getting warranties. So like if there's a repair, so for example, I was in an inspection where I always recommend people to get a sewer line inspection. How old are cast iron, or how old are the pipes, the sewer pipes, if it's public sewer in Delaware typically? Are they like old cast iron pipes like they are in Philly and
Well,
subject to
remember, the
breaking?
state's really old, so you could have, any of the above. I mean, all the city of Wilmington could be terracotta, for gosh sakes,
Okay.
which is even
So
worse.
yeah, so I always recommend getting a sewer line inspection so that at the very least you can see the condition. And recently I've had several where it was either blocked or completely deteriorated. One was a vacant house, and that to me is always a red flag. If it's vacant and water hasn't been running through it for a year, it could dry out, right? That was a $9,000 job that the seller had to do. And then the other one, we had a camera inspection and it was clogged. And so we require that the seller have snake it and have a camera inspection and say it's good. So they did that and they gave us a warranty that was for 30 days. But that only got us like 10 days past settlement. And because I've paid $5,000 recently to replace a broken sewer trap from my house to the public sewer, I've been on a mission to get everybody who can get the American Water Resources insurance for less like $10 a month to insure their water line and their sewer line, because you can't outsave $10 a month. Like $5,000, it'll take you 500 months to save that up. So that's my mission in life, to get everybody
You said $10
AWR.
a month? $10 a month, you said?
So in
$10 a
Philly,
month?
I think there's a subsidy in Philly that makes it $9.89 a month to insure your water and sewer line. It's available in 43 states, so we'll have to just double check in Delaware. But in the suburbs of Philly, it's like $12.50 a month. So like we get a couple dollar discount. But I think it's the idea of like if everybody signs up, then it's going to be like all our premiums could be really low, and then they'll cover the people whose break.
I'm thinking it'd be a great settlement gift, but that's a lot of money at settlement. I don't know what you do.
I tried. I wanted to like get people started on that, but I just bought a house this week. I actually had to email them my settlement statement. And this is what all your buyers, if you recommend, as I recommend, agents watching this, if you recommend your clients to get it immediately as soon as you close, you're gonna have to email them the Alta statement, and I emailed the deed that the seller signed over. And then you have a 30-day exclusionary period. So I'm not covered in the first 30 days. What I tried to do before I settled was to get the seller to buy 2 months worth of it. So that way, when I settled, their second 30 days would be my 30-day exclusionary period, just in case. And I think it's a great idea for sellers who don't have it in place yet to get it in place during the listing period, because then they're covered in 30 days and then they could hold that coverage 30 days after settlement. And that's a benefit to the buyer, and they could advertise that to the buyers.
That seems to be like the right way to go, because, my experience with that is that 75% of the time that you have a blocked pipe, water will pass through it.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean?
And then it's
so move in there and kind of be delicate. Remember, I'm a septic inspector. So when other things, solids and things, start moving through those pipes, that's when you're going to have the block up. And by the way, it's not going to take 30 days typically. You're going to know pretty quick. So unfortunately, that 30-day space they put in there pretty much eliminates the majority of their claims. Smart.
Right. And that's why I recommend to get the scoping first, because then you can put it on the seller. And it sounds like in Delaware, they're going to have to fix it. Am I wrong?
I would think so. But remember, you need to lock everything up in your contract language if you do additional inspections. You know what I mean? Because let me tell you what, people, like I'm working with a gentleman today. Well, let's just say I worked with a guy 3 weeks ago, so we don't have to, nobody can do any date time on me here. But he wants out of the deal. Any way he can do it. You know what I mean? So he is reading every line of his contract, and he's no dummy, and he's looking for any way out of that contract. He's way over his head. So, that happens.
Yeah, I just looked up, I just put in a Newark zip code. And so you can see the water and sewer line protection is $12.49 a month.
Mm-hmm.
And then they have other protection programs, like you can get the water line, the sewer line alone. What do they do here?
And I tell you what, if your client knows they have a polybutylene incoming water pipe, this would be a godsend.
What's that? Polybutylene.
Polybutylene. You ever seen that gray pipe that's in houses? It's like gray. It'll have gray plastic fittings, and sometimes it'll have silver rings and something. That's a piping material that fails. Most of the time, people who buy a house with that type of material are going to replace it. And when it leaks, it destroys stuff. So this would be an awesome product.
So I will tell you, number one, like if it's new construction and, you know, this water and sewer are new, of course, somebody doesn't need this. They don't need to do the scope. If somebody tells me that the city came through and replaced their, you know, water line and the sewer line, like they don't necessarily need this. But even though I replaced one trap under the sidewalk, I still got this because for me it was $9.89. Even at $12.49 a month, I would have done it because it also covers my water line. Maybe I'll never need it. I don't know, but it's $5,000 at least to replace that water line. Absolutely. And then also, I only replaced one trap, you know, under the sidewalk. So I still had a connection from my house to the trap and then from the trap to the city connection. So there's still, you know, at-risk material down there. So I was like, I can't live without this. I'll pay this until I die, you know.
Oh, it makes a lot of sense. And I think it's an awesome bit of research you did to find it. No.
Yeah.
We used to do sewer line inspections and we have the equipment to do it. The problem with us is getting that plug out. You know, if I break a fitting, then I got to hire a plumber to fix it. So it makes much more sense to have a plumber doing, or somebody who's attached to a plumbing contractor doing this work. Because, you know, they can pull a toilet and run the sewer line camera in and I can't. You know what I mean? So our guys would have to take that clean out plug out in the basement, that brass one. And the only way to get it out is beat it out with a hammer. Yeah. So always better to have somebody associated with a plumbing company, you know, do that work.
Yeah. And just before we move off of the insurance, you know, home warranties, also, they have a bunch of different programs here, and you could actually add all of this up, and now it starts to add up to, you know, one of those like America's Preferred Warranty, American Home Shield. Like, so there are warranty companies out there that will do it for $500 to $700 a year for like the whole thing. And, you know, these programs seem to like bundle, you could add it up. So for any agent or homeowner, I would say like kind of figure out what are the systems in your house that should have coverage that if it broke would put a big dent in your pocket or cause a hardship, and then just make sure you're covered. And sometimes utility companies will have their own version of these. So there's definitely a variety of resources, but by far, like definitely the water line and sewer protection program is an absolute must.
Very good. There are, we've had some experience with home warranty companies that have not been good. Remember, I think it's really good for the agents, new agents in particular, to understand the power structure around these warranty products. The broker typically has got, what, 80 agents in an office these days, seems like, you know, a lot of big offices. And generally he's making the decision or she's making the decision as to what companies are going to be used for that warranty. So the buyer is a one and done, right? So in other words, they're going to buy it once. They're not continuing business for the warranty company. And so anything they can do to avoid paying a claim, they're going to do because they're insurance, right? I mean, that's just business.
Yep.
So if they understand that the buyer calls them up, they're not going to get much response. But if you, the agent that sold it to them, calls that company and goes, you know, I'm going to sell 40 of these this year through my team. Do you hear me? And if that doesn't work, then the real power hit comes from the top, right? Then you go to your broker's office and go, you know what? This thing has got a bad heat exchanger and they're playing the heat exchanger game with us. What are we going to do here, boss? Boss goes, well, I got 80 agents here selling how many of these a month? Can you tell me? Let me tell you what, the warranty company gets the message in a big hurry. So I think it's good for people to understand the power structure there, because if you just tell your client to call them and you don't assist them, they're probably not going to have a great result on a major repair. Little stuff, yeah. But remember, the contractor that comes out is good and bad. You know what I mean? So you can have a good one or you can have a bad one. I had a guy show up at a house. My guy turned on, they had two shower heads, right? This one worked fine over here. And this one, just the hot water came out of it, but he spun it over to hot, saw he had hot water and shut it off. He didn't realize the cold wasn't working on there. It was a $12 part. But the guy from the warranty company came in and said, well, there's no cold water line run to that side of the shower at all. We're going to have to tear the shower stall out. We're going to cut the walls up here. It's going to be $2,400. So I got called in and I went in, and now the people own the house. So at this point, yes, I can take the darn faucet apart because they own it and they give me permission to do it. And sure enough, there was two lines hooked up to it. It was a Wolverine brass cartridge that cost $12, and that guy was trying to make $2,400 on it. As soon as we got the guy on the phone from the plumbing company, he was apologetic. And of course, the next thing we knew, the plumbing contractor got fired. The work all got fixed at their house. They got refunded their money. And it moved on only because we had the involvement of a very good agent and a very good broker. So that's what I'm saying. That's a lesson to learn, is that if the broker gets involved, that's going to be the key to the big lock. We may not need to go that far, but just know you as the agent have power in this circumstance. Yeah. You also have the ear of the agents around you.
Yeah, and you make me want to make a couple points. Number one, some warranty companies will let you pick your own contractor. Number two, not every policy is for replacement. So a lot of times, like, the utility companies might only repair the item, but if it needs to be replaced, they'll just refund you your $100 that you paid for that year. It's like, that doesn't really help me. And then what you're saying is, like, I always tell my clients, when I'm talking to them about like lenders or inspectors, I'm their client. You may be paying them, but they want my referrals. So they're going to give you better service because of their relationship with me. So you're saying exactly the same thing in regard to home warranty companies.
Yeah, just understand the power structure. That's all.
Yeah. So in the last,
we've had some good stuff with warranty companies too. I'm not negative on them, but just understand who they are.
What's your take on radon? In our last couple minutes, I'd love to hear your take on radon.
Well, let's see. If you were going to ask a guy about radon, let's see. I'm certified to do schools, big buildings, houses, remediation of large-scale buildings. I carry about 4 credentials in the radon area. So what particular things do you want to talk about?
So how often do you see it in Delaware homes? My understanding is that 4.0 picocuries per liter is the acceptable level or below. You're shaking your head.
And I don't like to do that to you.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm going to control my head. 3.9 passes, 4.0 fails.
Right. Okay. Got it. And then, I see people get very upset when they see levels of 5, 6, 7, 8. I've also experienced hundreds, like levels in the hundreds. So my perspective is a little different than maybe what most people see in the marketplace. So I'm just curious what you think of the risk is at levels 4, 5, 8. And maybe it doesn't matter, because maybe if you test for radon in Delaware, the seller has to do it, or if they refuse, you can terminate. So you tell me.
Yeah, that's true. But here's the way it works. Look, if you buy a house in Middletown, Delaware, 1 out of 4 shot, you got radon.
Yeah.
Middletown. All right. That's the highest level, 138 in the state that was ever recorded. So we have high radon levels. We have not crazy, like I've fixed houses with 177s in them before. We do radon mitigation work as well. We're in a lot of areas of business around real estate. It just makes sense. You know what I mean? I have 13, well, we're at 11 employees right now. We're hiring. So radon mitigation, you could figure between, say $950 and about $1,800 if it's something extreme. Now, if it's got a crawl space that needs to be lined, you could be into $3,000 pretty quick in a crawl space. Wow. Yeah, just remember, a crawl space house, like a lot of people say, well, I'm not testing because it's a crawl space. I go, well, if it needs a radon mitigation job and it's a dirt crawl space, it's going to be very expensive. And as far as levels of 4 or 5 goes, look, I got people constantly, remember, we're in the mitigation business. We're well known in Delaware as one of the providers. And we have people constantly calling me up with levels of 1.9 that want systems. So, look, the World Health Organization put out a letter and said that they wanted people to have levels of under 2.2 in their houses, and that spread through the internet. So now everybody says, when I do a mitigation job, well, if it's not under 2.2, we won't accept it. Here's the deal. Your contract said when you bought the house that you would accept a level of 3.9. Now, my goal is to get it to 0, and by the way, lately, we used to use different size fans. We would use a 4-inch fan on a 4 or 5 level and a 6-inch fan on stuff. You know what I'm doing now? For an extra $50, I can buy a monster fan and put on the side of their house. Now, it's not going to be crazy noisy. There's a step up from that is insane. But let me tell you what, it gives me really good reduction, and I don't have to come back and mess with it. You know what I mean? Like, in other words, I'm going to shoot the howitzer and we're going to win, and yay, we're done. And that's really the way I see mitigation. Our average mitigation job is in the prices that we kind of told you. Now, something that doesn't happen a lot in Delaware that does in PA is we have no enforcement dollars for radon regulation in Delaware. I just opened up the door to a closet and saw a radon fan in the basement. Oh my God. You can't put the radon fan in the basement.
Yeah. It's supposed to be on the outside of the house, right?
or up in the attic space or someplace where somebody knocks a pipe off the top of it, it ain't going to kill everybody in the house over a period of time. Because remember,
Wow.
what drifts into your house is, 4, 5, 10, 20, whatever you got. In Malvern, you might be 300, So, but what comes out of the end of that radon pipe is serious business. When I'm up on a roof and there's a radon pipe, I don't go near it.
What are the levels that you commonly see when people are testing positive over 4?
It just depends on where I am. Like in Delaware, if we get a 15 here, everybody's like crazy. You know what I mean? Up in Pennsylvania, I get a 25 on a slab and nobody's even, okay, just fix it. You know what I mean? So it really depends on the folks.
Now, would you recommend it if a house doesn't have a basement? Would you still recommend getting a test?
I'm so glad you asked me that question, Stacy. All right, yes, absolutely. Let me tell you a story about a friend of mine. So she calls me up. She says, John, I need you to come test my house over in Maryland for radon. I'm like, well, what's going on? She goes, I got lung cancer. She says, I've been living in this house. It's a slab. All my realtor friends told me when I bought it, I didn't need to test for radon there. She had a level 12 and she's dead.
Wow.
So she was tough. She was official. She was always dressed to the T. She always had it. Everything in front of her was perfect, always. And then to have her call me in such a condition was just really sad. But anyway,
out of curiosity, did
yeah.
she smoke?
Not in 25 or 30 years. That same length of time she lived in a house with a radon level.
I mean, don't you have to be, isn't it more like high levels of exposure over a long period of time?
Well, you want to get into the science for just a little bit. The Europeans see it this way. They say, and they just changed their level. It used to be like in Canada, I think it was like 15 and they just dropped it to like 7, 5 or 5. I think it was 5 they dropped it to.
I was wondering about that.
The Europeans feel like the level goes to a certain, this is weird, it's backwards. Hold on, I don't know how to do things backwards. So they say that the level drops down and then falls off and is not a hazard at a certain level. The American theory is that every bit of radon that you ever experience in your whole life from the day you were born will have an effect on you, and that as a cumulative effect will drive lung cancer. But I got another way of describing it. When you've taken every course that you can take on radon and then you find one on giving radon classes, why not, right? So they describe, when we talk about radon, I always say like radon is like a little 3.8 day firecracker floating through your house. You inhale it, fine, blow it out, fine. You inhale it, goes off and can do a little damage, right? What they said was, think about it this way. If we were standing, like usually I'm in a classroom with this. So I got 20 people in the classroom. And let's say I'm up here blindfolded and I got a stack of darts in front of me and I'm throwing these darts at you out there. I can't see you, but I'm just throwing them. What do you think the likelihood of me hitting you in lung tissue in the exact spot that stops that lung tissue from becoming cancerous with that dart I'm throwing? What do you think my chances are?
Right,
Not
very
too good,
little.
right? So let's get in a really high level. Now the darts are up to my nose and there's 4 of us throwing them.
Yeah.
Okay, so in other words, the first dart can be the one that gets you.
Yeah.
So in other words, cumulative exposure, yeah, because you have more opportunities for that hit that gets you just right, but the first one can kill you.
Yeah. I think tying it back to the contract itself in terms of negotiations is number one, if the default is the seller is going to do it or give you the option to get out of the contract, it makes more sense to do the radon test, even if it's on a slab, than not to do it. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah, and remember this, you can't tell me looking at a house with a slab that it doesn't have radon.
Right.
I can't look at it and tell you that it does, but the only way we're going to know is test. Here's another one for you. Ground contact is kind of what you're discussing, right? So they did a study of a large commercial building in Florida and a hotel, and the highest levels of radon in the building were on the 7th floor.
Wow.
Yeah, well, there's more to the story, obviously. You guys ever walk down the street in front of a hotel and you hear that one vent that just really sucks a lot of air in right at the street level? You ever been by a hotel and there's that intake, right?
Yeah,
well, in
probably.
this case, yeah, well, that intake led across a dirt crawl space underneath of the building and then was picked up by a return or a supply duct and shoved up to the 7th floor. So in other words, so what I'm saying is you can't to try to look at the building and extrapolate whether it's going to have a problem or not. Now, I'll tell you what, if I got a building on a set of piers at the beach that don't touch the ground, I'm going to have a hard time thinking we got radon in that thing. You know what I mean? Because it doesn't physically contact the ground or it doesn't have mechanical devices that are bringing air up from the ground. But other than that, look, we do a lot of large scale testing. And by the way, I don't know if you know what's coming. There's a little trick in the new HUD regulation. You want to do an FHA loan, you better be able to provide a radon test because it's going to be required of every single HUD transaction. It's already required. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask you, if the condo is approved for FHA financing, but I was just going to ask, if it's a condo, do you think you should test? Because like you said, you don't know how the HVAC system is set up, and there could be that exhaust
An
vent.
anomaly. It's an anomaly, but it could be there.
Yeah.
Look, here's what I think. You got to let the consumer make this decision.
Yeah.
If the consumer wants to test, we'll test. If the consumer doesn't want to test, we won't test. If the
Yeah.
consumer, we're standing in the middle of Middletown, Delaware, and they're telling me or Downingtown, you know what I mean? They're telling me they don't want to test. And I go, okay, well, just, when you move in, think about running a little test kit down a hardware store. Look, I know it's expensive to have us do this, but you know what? For about 35 bucks, go to the hardware store. You won't be able to ask the seller to fix it, but at least you'll know.
Yeah.
Here's an example of that. I'm working with a builder, by the way, you would know their name. They're probably pretty close to billionaires. They're just super powerfully big, expensive folks and nice folks. I got to know them pretty well working on the house because it took me all damn summer to fix that place. It was about a $4 million house. It had a huge footprint. They lived in it 6 years before they popped the radon test in there and found out they were living with a level of 125.
Wow.
And I'll tell you what, it was a significant job to fix the radon in that place because of the size of it, the footprint, and the rocks underneath that place were angry. If you know somebody who's blasting to put a house in, make sure they're testing for radon.
Yeah, because it comes from uranium pockets in the ground, soil and water.
Exactly correct. Yeah, and it can come in water. But remember this about water, there is no current standard in the state of Pennsylvania or Delaware or Maryland for radon in water. There is in Rhode Island and Massachusetts, it's 4,000 and 5,000 respectively.
Yeah.
So
I'm just quoting what's on the radon risks remedy and rights, or rights radon risk, whatever, the 4 R's. There's a form for Delaware buyers.
I haven't seen this form. You should send it to me.
Oh yeah, let me open it up and I'll show it to you. Give me 1 second. But yeah, so the way I look at it is, if you don't know whether or not you want to test and you're not competing with another buyer, by all means, elect that inspection, because you can do your research and then decide not to do it. Because for, whatever the cost is, if it's $150, you have the right and opportunity to ask the seller to pay for it. The $950 to $1,800 or whatever the range was you said, to fix it. So as a calculation, it's a good bet, to pay $150 for somebody to pay $1,500 if there's a problem. So
I've stood up in front of crowds all over Delaware and said those exact same words. Stacy, I so agree with you.
So in your negotiations, when you're not competing, and if the default is that the seller is going to remediate, or you have the opportunity to not to buy the house, and you're the kind of person that would love to have an opportunity to terminate if you need to, then definitely say you're going to. But then also conversely, knowing that radon is a relatively fixed cost of $1,000 to $2,000, let's say, that you might, if you're in a competition with other buyers, well, then waive it. Do the test later and know what the cost will be. Calculate that into your overall, cost. Because things on the home inspection, I always see things like $5,000 worth of stuff that could be done. $10,000 worth of stuff. It's, the risk of the home inspection is always greater than like treating for termites or remediating for radon, which are more fixed costs. So I just look at it that way in terms of whether or not to do it within the contract period.
I would be with you on the radon part pretty good. When you say termite stuff, treatment has a pretty fixed or manageable cost, but damage from termites can be extremely variable.
Correct. And I'm not saying to ever waive the termite. I wouldn't waive the termite ever. I'm just saying that those two items, unlike home inspections have a variable cost, whereas those two are pretty easy to remediate the specific source of the problem. And
I totally agree with you on that. The cost of a termite treatment, and remember, I run Affordable Pest Control. It's one of my brands. And so, $1,000 roughly, maybe, if it's a big house, you might spend twice that, but you're not going to get charged $5,000 for a treatment. This isn't the general public. Look, one of the reasons that most of the real estate agents don't work with the large nationally advertised termite companies is simply because the cost of the treatments is outrageous. You know what I mean? So the smaller companies who operate in the real estate world tend to understand that, look, we got a seller who's not going to live there. It's not a lifetime thing for them. It's pay it so we can leave. So then you have to operate at a more reasonable cost structure to get those jobs. And a lot of guys hate real estate in the termite business. They would just stay away from it as much as they can. And it's not to do with the people in the business. It's the fact that you're working for somebody who's buying a property. And so for your $150 inspection, you could wind up eating thousands of dollars worth of problems in that house. Where if you're working for a consumer, they already own their own problems, and your only risk is if you mess up doing your chemical app or something.
Yeah.
So
That's
the risk in real estate is extremely much higher than it is in normal real estate deal or normal.
Yeah. So when you say they hate real estate, you mean the transaction, doing it in the transaction versus just doing it for a homeowner.
Yeah, because it's like for me as a home inspector, look, when I'm inspecting your house as a seller that you already own and aren't planning to sell, then it's between us and what I can find, I find. I'm a straight up consultant. You're not using my findings to advertise the property. But now when I'm doing a pre-list, I still have some of the same stuff that I would in a regular transaction.
Right.
But I do maintenance inspections for people all the time. I tell you, well, I don't want to say who they are, but some of my biggest people that I work for are nonprofit organizations doing money where they get money to renovate houses and they need to get a good picture of what's wrong with the house and they bring us in to inspect it. That's my biggest customer.
Yeah.
We do. So our liability is pretty limited.
I do want to talk about real quick and then wrap up about what you said about the damage. But this is the radon rights, risks, and remedy for the home buyer form that I was mentioning. Yeah, it states that 1 in 12 homes in Delaware test high, 4.0 or above. With regard to the termite damage, so my understanding is that the old agreement of sale in Delaware used to have a 2% threshold, such that if the damage based on radon, damage based on termites was 2% of the purchase price or higher, the buyer had the right to terminate. Now it's 10% of the price.
Yeah, I thought it was
so
10%. That's what I thought.
Yeah. So the new contract is 10%. I don't know when the change was made, but I'm aware that it used to be 2%. At some point, it was 2%. So essentially, on a $300,000 house, if you get the subsequent inspection from the structural engineer that you're entitled to, and it's $30,000 to fix the damage, or above, you can terminate. But anything below, you pretty much have to give the seller that opportunity to do so.
Right.
So
and is the seller going to buck up with $36,000 worth of repair money? Generally that's hard for them to do. So.
Yeah. So anyway, any last? What's that?
I was going to say, in my experience, most of the termite damage I see is fairly minor.
Yeah.
That's the majority of it. Every once in a while, you see a house that just got hit, and usually it's somebody elderly who just didn't notice. And the termites just had 30 years to work on the house. Like the house I'm sitting in here, I got the parts of this house the termites didn't want. So, but I have the skills and we got it done.
Yeah.
80 foot of sill plate, 80 feet of sill plate had to come out from under this house.
I don't know what that means. What's 80 feet of sill plate?
From the bottom of your house to the top of the foundation, there's a board right in there. On this house, it's a 6x8. And most of it came out shop vac. That's how bad the damage was. But we fixed it. It's a great old house, I think sometimes the experience of the home inspector, having been through a lot in his life, having been involved in building houses and being involved in projects where major damage has been repaired in house, is very reassuring to the buyer, because then they got somebody standing in front of them they know has seen stuff way worse than what we're looking at. I think the difference between a home inspector and an engineer is pretty clear. A home inspector operates on experience, memory, things we've done, things that worked at my mom's 1700s house, things that worked on this house's 1870s here. Where an engineer is strictly math, and you need them on foundation wall break. You don't need them on termite damage unless the house is shifted. You know what I mean? So, because if a termite ate 2 foot of a 2x4, guess what I need? I need 2 foot of a 2x4. I don't need an engineer for that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, any last things that advice you want to give to agents when they're listing a home or looking through homes or preparing their buyers for?
To a pre-list inspection. Now, I'll tell you what, in your current market space, you got to decide where you're at with that, though. I mean, if the house is going to have 97 offers tomorrow, you know what I mean? But I'll tell you what, if you've got an unusual property, you got a property mom's been in for a really long time and we don't understand the conditions, I think a pre-list inspection makes a heck of a lot of sense. Remember, if I go up on your roof, here's an example. I got a property for sale. My mom passed. We got a property for sale down the beach. I just paid a roofer $350 to tune up the roof before the home inspection. He replaced a dozen shingles, replaced all the vent collars that were torn. And so we're not going to buy a roof. But if I'd left it the condition it was in, we were going to buy a $20,000 roof.
Yeah, so it sounds like if you did, I definitely agree that the pre-list inspection is definitely market dependent because there have definitely been times in my career that I have done them versus not done them. In Delaware, it's different in that it puts the onus on the seller to say no before the buyer can terminate. But what it sounds like is that if they're doing it in a hot market, if they do the pre-list, or they don't need it because the buyer is just going to accept the property, they could go to the next guy. Is that the idea?
Well, I'm never going to say not do a pre-list, but I do understand market conditions, that you all react to market conditions.
Yeah.
Remember,
So,
I'm getting half the contracts in Delaware right now, and I ain't happy about it.
What's that?
I said we're getting
Say
written out half the contracts in this state right now. We're not happy.
The inspectors?
The realtors are not putting inspections in their contracts in this state.
Oh, right. Yeah. Well, see, to me, it's like, it sounds like doing a pre-list will also help people sell houses as is. Because my old broker used to say, how can you sell a house as is if you don't know what is? Because most sellers don't know what is in their house, until you have that inspection to tell you what's wrong with the house. So having that pre-list either A, allows you to disclose everything up front, and then you can have that expectation setting with the buyer. Hey, like, you can get your own inspection or you can get estimates, but we're not going to do it. So you're wasting your money, if you get under contract with us. Or if there's multiple offers, it's like the buyers can go into it with their eyes wide open, knowing that this is what they're accepting. In our state.
I'm sorry. I keep cutting you off. I don't mean to keep cutting you off. Every time you hesitate, I think I should speak, so I apologize. But
That's okay.
Anyway, so what I would say about a pre-list in any market is, in Delaware, because the seller can make all the repairs and keep the buyer, if you make small repairs that prevent the buyer from asking for larger repairs, it's easier to lock the buyer in. Makes sense to you? So in other words, those dozen missing cap shingles will be an opportunity for the buyer to command a new roof, where when they walk up and there's a dozen brand new cap shingles up there and caulk on every nail hole.
Yeah. So yesterday on this new house that I bought, there's a little tiny shed that has a roof on it, a decent roof. And there's, I guess, 25 sheets of shingles. And the roofer said, yeah, about 6 of them could be replaced. And I was like, well, how would it look? And he's like, well, it wouldn't look great, but it's facing the way that is good. You don't really look at it. It's like, and it's in the back of the property. And I was like, well, what would it cost to like do the 6, sheets of shingles versus one side versus both sides of the, shed roof? So it's like, I think it was like $1,000 to do half the job, and then that would have been acceptable. Or it's $2,000 to do one side, or together it's like $3,000. So, like you said, it's like, so like you do the $1,000 job and you avoid, $2,000 or $3,000 potentially.
Exactly.
I mean,
that's my point. And we always use the roofing as an example, because I'll tell you, when you're trying to sell stuff, you want to find a crystallized small area that's easy to understand. And for the roofer, or for the homeowner, seeing the top of the roof is impossible in most cases. Yeah. They don't know what's up there. And that's why, unfortunately, there's a lot of rip-offs on roof jobs. Like the guy who drove one nail in each shingle, got me sued. So. It's
funny because when you say a rip-off on a roof, there's 2 meanings. One is like that guy who ripped the Klein off. The other is a good rip-off is when they tear off the old layers versus just keep going on top, which that's the rip-off.
I'll tell you, in the city, they just keep going on top. Oh my gosh, I've had 7 roofs on one house, and you get up there and the framing's all broken and collapsed, and it's like, oh my, why? I mean, look, you beat the other guy's bid. Yeah, you did. You beat his bid. You're $1,000 cheaper, and the roof system is going to collapse because of your idiocy. I mean, look, you know what? I think in life, the most important thing I'm finding about people is to find people who have that good moral compass, because everything else will work better. And if they don't have it, nothing else will work.
Yeah.
And those people are hard to identify. And once you identify them, you want to keep them right here in that shirt pocket. You know what I mean? Don't tell nobody else about them, because I know realtors are like, I'm not telling you my roofer is, because he's mine.
Right. Yeah.
So when you find the right people, I think good advice to new agents is also get the right toolbox full of folks. In other words, know who a good stucco guy is, know a good stucco inspector, know a good termite guy, have all those people available to you, or at least have a general contractor that can lead you to those folks, or good agents around you that care enough to put you onto the right people, are willing to share that little roofer they got in their pocket that they use for special stuff. Those are, look, new agents, I see that as the biggest difficulty for them, is they get in a situation where they just got to get a price for something and they don't know who to call. They don't have enough experience in the field where they've, like what I try to teach new agents is you got to feed your people. In other words, you keep calling the same roofer up for a free bid all the time. Guess who's eventually going to block your number? Every once in a while, you got to make sure he gets that shed job or something small. Or, you know, you got to understand these people will operate with you if you operate with them fairly. But as soon, I'll quote my buddy. My buddy used to say this about business. He says, look, if you want business to work, he says, treat everybody fairly, no matter who it is, all the time. And he says, and it will work and it will last. You can take advantage of people for a short time and get yourself you get ahead for a short period. But then when you go back to those people and need more help, they're going to shun you. So that didn't help you in the long run. So be fair to everybody. Tell people what you can do and go do it. And don't tell them you can do stuff you can't.
Yeah.
Simple.
And my final advice would be based on what you're just saying in terms of getting good contractors is whenever I need somebody, well, first of all, I'm always keeping my eye open on our office roster. When somebody says, hey, anybody got a stucco guy, and somebody responds, I always grab their name and I have Erin look up their Yelp reviews and then put them in my Homekeeper app, which is my vendor database. Or I look on our Facebook group to see who's recommending. And then I always ask the group, you know, when I need somebody, and then gathering those people so that I do have that base. And then another great thing is to ask your clients, you know, ask the people you know, ask homeowners you know, who they use. And that's actually part of our prospecting bootcamp, is to teach people how to build their vendor database while calling people and just creating that touch, you know, nurturing them. And it's not salesy at all. It's actually helping, you know, your future clients. It's helping that roofer get more jobs. It's helping, you know, you build your business. So it's a win-win,
And that
win-win.
roofer might need a house too. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Roofers need roofs.
Well, we used to call it sideways marketing. You know what I mean? Like you market to the mortgage guy. You market, like if I'm at an event somewhere and there's nobody to market to, I work those guys. You know what I mean? Because they are chasing you just like I'm chasing you, all realtors. So we have a shared thing there. So remember that sideways marketing, you know, like if they're in the mortgage business, their son's buying a house, you've sent them business, well, you're going to get that. And just remember, this business is, I always say it's like there's a stream that runs under the feet of business people that we know about that nobody else understands. You know what I mean? There's a connection between us.
Yeah. Well, people tell me all the time, oh, I bought phone numbers to call from this one service and it was a wrong number. I was like, did they breathe when they picked up the phone? Yeah. Well, don't they need a place to stay?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
You know, everybody needs a home. So,
Yeah, well, you
all right,
really
John.
that way. Thank you so much for having me today. Hopefully I met your expectations and my stuff worked, which I'm pretty happy about.
Yeah, no, I learned so much, and I think people will really benefit from having watched this conversation, because we talked about some really good stuff that I don't think you probably talked about in some other classes.
Oh, no, because a lot of what we were talking about is the political activities within the business, not so much the way the consumer reacts to us.
Yeah.
All right, well,
Cool.
Thank you all so much. And like I said, I'm really happy this went, because we had a little technical issue the last time. So thanks an awful lot for having me.
Thanks, John.
Thank you very
Take
much.
care.
Bye-bye.
I'm gonna log out.
Okay.